And at one point, Governor Walz and some of his agencies said, whoa, maybe we ought to put a stop to this. And they backed off. They said, no more money for a while. Well, fresh hell broke loose. You know what happened? The largest, most powerful, fictitious company, run mostly by people of Somali ancestry, sent an email.
What happens when government officials see the warning signs, do nothing, and then act shocked when the truth explodes? Today on Right Focus, we're breaking down a Senate floor moment that exposes exactly how political fear and incompetence can cost taxpayers millions. If you want real accountability and straight talk, hit like, subscribe, and let's get into it.
Now, Governor Walz says, I knew nothing about this, man. It's news to me. And he said, in fact, I'm taking some bold steps. He said, at first, I'm not going to run for a third term. I guess he needs more time. Hope he uses the time to prepare his defense, because he's got a lot to defend here. He knew what was going on. In fact, one of the lawyers representing one of the thieves in this case said many of the people, this was their excuse, said many of the people involved in the stealing thought that the state was okay with it. That's what he said. Here's his quote. No one was doing anything about the red flags. Red flags were everywhere. Nobody in state government, he said, was doing anything about the red flags. It was like someone was stealing money from the cookie jar and they kept refilling it. The state knew. And at one point, Governor Walz and some of his agencies said, whoa, maybe we ought to put a stop to this. And they backed off. They said, no more money for a while. Well, fresh hell broke loose. You know what happened? The largest, most powerful, fictitious company, run mostly by people of Somali ancestry, sent an email to the Minnesota state government. And they said that the state agency that was failing to promptly approve new applications and give us new money from, quote, minority-owned businesses, close quote, was going to result in a lawsuit featuring accusations of racism that would be sprawled across the news. If you don't give us our money, we're going to call you racist. They did it. It's all come out in evidence at trial. In fact, a lady by the name of Kesa Megan, she's one of the good guys. She is a Somali American who used to work as a fraud investigator in the Attorney General's office, who, by the way, was just as involved as Governor Walz in turning a blind eye to all this. She says, and she said it in the newspaper, she said that elected officials, and particularly those who are part of the state's Democratic-led administration, were reluctant to take more assertive action in response to the allegations. Why? Here's her quote. There is a perception that forcefully tackling this issue might cause political backlash from the Somali community, which is a core voting bloc for Democrats. And she is among the few among many prominent figures in the Somali community who is speaking out against the fraud.
Before we dive in, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel, because this is the kind of story the legacy media would rather rush past than explain honestly. Senator John Kennedy didn't mince words when he laid this out. He walked through how Minnesota's government ignored obvious red flags while taxpayer money kept flowing out the door. According to what came out in court, this wasn't some hidden, impossible-to-detect scheme. The warning signs were everywhere, and yet the money kept getting approved. Governor Tim Walz now claims he knew nothing and that this all came as a surprise. But that explanation collapses under even basic scrutiny. When lawyers representing people involved in the fraud say many participants believed the state was fine with what was happening, that tells you everything. People don't think that way unless government behavior signals permission. Kennedy compared it to someone stealing from a cookie jar while the state kept refilling it. That analogy fits perfectly. Agencies saw the problems, considered stopping the payments, and then backed off. Why? Because the moment the money slowed down, threats started flying. Evidence presented at trial showed that state officials were warned they could face accusations of racism if they didn't approve more funding. And instead of standing firm, protecting taxpayers, and demanding accountability, they folded. That's not leadership. That's political cowardice. What makes this even more damaging is that insiders spoke up. A former fraud investigator, herself a Somali American, publicly stated that Democratic officials were hesitant to act because they feared backlash from a key voting bloc. That's not a right-wing opinion. That's a fact stated by someone who was inside the system. This isn't about ethnicity, and it never should be. It's about a government that put politics ahead of oversight and allowed a massive fraud to grow because stopping it was inconvenient. When officials are more afraid of headlines than of wasting taxpayer money, this is exactly what you get. Senator Kennedy said what millions of Americans are thinking. If you ignore fraud long enough, it doesn't quietly disappear. It explodes. And when it does, pretending you knew nothing isn't an excuse. It's an indictment of leadership. That's why stories like this matter. They show what happens when accountability dies and political calculation takes its place. If you believe taxpayers deserve better, make sure you're subscribed to Right Focus, hit like, and share this video so more people hear the truth.